Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 235. I'm not quite sure how it's taken this long to get this guest on the podcast, but Chris Toombs, how are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. And I can't believe 235 already. I'm just going to write a little note to myself here. Look out for 235 in a few weeks when the post production has been done. Hopefully the light's not shining off the top of my head there.
That's when the internet crashes because we get so many listens on it. That's why.
Yeah, of course. Those three.
Chris, no, in all seriousness, I really appreciate you coming on. I just want to say a big thank you to Josh Fletcher as well for the hookup and the recommendation. I really appreciate it. We've spoke already about a number of different topics that we should have recorded, but let's get into what we actually agreed now. And I know you just joked before that this might take a while with a very extensive career that you've had so far. Can you give us a 2-3-minute version of a bit of a background on yourself?
I'll try and do it in two. Yeah, I mean, essentially, 28 years working in professional sport and across the fitness industry. Started my career as a personal trainer back in the 90s. We did joke offline about the internet. The internet didn't exist when I did my undergraduate degree and my master's. So that just gives you a little bit of a kind of insight into the age profile that I may be owning. Okay, so I guess performance sport wise, I'm trying to do this in that 2-minute window. First job in professional sport, crossed the academy and the senior first team for Leicester Tigers. Pretty exciting time to be at Leicester Tigers. England won the Rugby World Cup. That's going back in 2003. And it was my first exposure to velocity-based training, and I know we'll talk about that as we go. Moved across the road to Wales and did a pretty good stint at the Cardiff Blues, now Cardiff Rugby. 9 seasons there, which again spanned the academy program, and I graduated to the senior program alongside some of the sort of now more high-profile players who ended up playing for Wales and a couple for the British and Irish Lions. That was 9 years. Bounced over to the United States for the first time, worked for a rugby organization who essentially were tasked with developing and growing the game in North America. It was a commercial business, but it did sit quite closely aligned with the national governing body, USA Rugby. I did 2 years in Seattle. My youngest daughter was born in Seattle, so it's a place that's kind of close to my heart. And more on that later, because I did go back in 2019 to work for the Seattle Seawolves in Major League Rugby as part of Major League's professional kind of rugby program there. But in the meantime, between the first and the second, I did a year at Northants County Cricket Club, which was an exceptionally fun and enlightening year in professional sport outside of rugby, which is something I'd not done at that particular time. Dipped my toe in academia for 3 years and worked at the University of South Wales as a strength and conditioning lecturer, and alongside that did some private work with a downhill mountain biker, which was super fun, and worked in semi-professional rugby. Like I say, then went back to Seattle to do the performance lead role for Seattle Seawolves in Major League Rugby. And now I work as a contractor. I work for SW7 Academy, which is Sam Warburton's online strength and conditioning business. I've got head of performance title, and I do a lot of the, quality assurance around programming and the back end kind of bit of content creation, which is kind of fun on the digital side of strength and conditioning. And I also work across coach education, velocity-based training mainly, and dip my toe into sports tech as well with Output Sports and a company called Strive who do surface EMG technology. So that was probably more than 2 minutes, but I think you get the impression.
That was impressive.
Done a fair few years in this game.
Not only was it impressive with the CV, but it was impressive on the time as well. So well done on that. That was top work. In terms of the role now, Chris, you've obviously mentioned about S&C support. What sort of, obviously there's Sam's background in rugby, yourself in rugby majority as well. Is it mainly rugby players that you're working with? Is it a mix of sports?
No, a mix of sports. So yeah, the premise of the platform is to give elite level training to anyone who wants to develop athleticism. So and in a hands-on kind of sense, we do once a year lifting club, which is hands-on coaching for those who are essentially based in South Wales, because that's where we're positioned. but we have elite level women's footballers who've used the platform. We've got footballers, we've got cricket players, we've got a lot of people actually from GAA, Gaelic kind of sports have come over, and because they want to kind of blend their athleticism with their, I guess, the collision element of their sport. And yeah, rugby is obviously a core market for us as well. We just spent the week in Roslyn Park Sevens, actually, down in London. Phenomenal event. I mean, that's the kind of genuine impact that we want to make, which is providing players who haven't necessarily got access to good quality strength and conditioning wherever they're based. Really good programming that's going to develop those physical qualities that are going to allow them to shine in their given particular sport. But yeah, the programming essentially is all geared around a better athlete, and then we hope that will transfer to them becoming a better player in their chosen sport. But yeah, we're not specifically pigeonholing ourselves as rugby specialists, even though that's where most of our kind of background comes from.
So with the rugby, cricket, the downhill, all the experience that you've got so far, what do you think coaches, sports scientists, S&C coaches that working in football can maybe take as a lesson from those other sports? What are some of the key standouts you think?
I just think all of us can learn from each individual sport. And I really do believe that there's crossover with all of them and there's commonalities with all of them. I think as I've got more experienced as a practitioner, I'll just give a frame of reference. When I was a young academy practitioner, I was very much obsessed with my subject area, almost living in that silo of, well, if they're faster, they're bigger, they're stronger, they're leaner, they're fitter, then I've done my job. And I think one of the things that I guess my professional practice has done and how I've evolved as a coach over time is that actually I've taken the physical prowess piece and woven that into the tactical, technical, and psychological, integrated nutrition, integrated sports psychology, integrated the sports science elements, and actually have a philosophy now which is all about, are we as support staff and practitioners enabling the players to become better players and better people? And I think that's the biggest thing that I think we all can take, whether we work in football, cricket, rugby, the downhill mountain biking stories. Hopefully we can dive into that a little bit more, because that's a mindset thing for me, where you're training a person who is paid to ride a bike downhill as fast as possible through trees, over rocks. One error then leads to catastrophe. And the reason why I ended up training this particular athlete is because the first time I met him, it was in the fracture clinic, and I think he had just broken his arm, and the previous injury had been a broken collarbone. And I saw some of the videos on YouTube of him crashing at 50 plus miles an hour, hitting trees and all sorts. And it was the most exciting and kind of challenging journey for the both of us, because I had to manage essentially someone whose mindset was always redlining, going 100 miles an hour. It's got to be, that was the mentality. And I sometimes had to do some, I guess, putting the handbrake up and say, mate, just go 5% slower so you can actually finish on the podium as opposed to finish in the ambulance. And it was one of the best experiences I've had. And I haven't even really spent much time reflecting and speaking to him about it, but I might signpost him to this and hopefully he can have a listen in. But I mean, going back to the football piece, I just think strength and power was always my kind of bias. But also, I've been speaking to football practitioners in recent months, particularly. And yes, we want to transfer everything to the grass. And I said to someone actually yesterday, this is genuine conversation, you don't have to do your strength and power training in the gym. You can, if you're resourceful enough and you've got a level of adaptability, take some of the methodologies of developing strength and power and put them on the grass if there's a level of resistance to what you're trying to implement from a practical application standpoint. And I just think having those conversations in and around the football community that crosses over to the rugby community, the cricket community. I mean, cricket was a really interesting kind of diversion for me, but with the level of skill involved, and to some degree, again, using some coaching, I guess, skills to enable players to value strength and conditioning more, because they were so skillful, but didn't necessarily value the support staff in terms of what being a better athlete would do for their game, in terms of their ability to recover from the physical exertion, the recovery elements, the nutrition side. So you know that whole 360-degree approach to performance. And I guess it took a few pretty significant conversations with some players to actually get into their psyche around, actually, we're here to support you, we're here to help you, we're here to help you realize your ambitions and fulfill your potential, but you're leaving something on the table if you don't take some of your strength and conditioning seriously. And we both know, we've both been around the performance block long enough to know that not everybody is going to value strength and conditioning as highly as someone like a Sam Warburton or a Lee Halfpenny, whose work ethic is absolutely exceptional, and their diligence to that element of their performance is second to none. There are players who we're going to have to coerce and coax and cajole to get them into the gym, or to get them to do some things that essentially they might not see as really important pieces in their performance. But I think if you can have that coaching connection piece there, and you can actually get on their wavelength and ask them, how we can support them better, then I think there'll be that greater buy-in from their perspective when it comes to, actually, even if I just do 25% of what the coach is asking me to do, I'm going to become a better player. And if they can become a better player, they'll have career longevity. Like I say, they'll fulfill their goals, and they'll be, most sports people, especially at elite level, they're alphas. They want to be the domineering kind of player in their team, in their league, whether that's whichever sport. So it's it's a balancing act, isn't it? I mean, going back full circle to my studies before the internet, I loved the fact that I kind of went down the sport science sport and exercise science and the psychology route, because I really think that's helped me as a practitioner. And I know we'll probably talk about what a young coach can do for the future, for their development and what have you. But I love the fact that I took a real interest in the sports psychology route as well, because I think some of that's really helped me engage and connect with players, because I think that's still a crucial element, Ben. You know what it's like in the digital age of, strength and conditioning and information awareness on the internet, and, the deluge of scientific journals that are, publishing on every single subject area that a human could think of. The young practitioners are definitely going to get overwhelmed by the amount of information out there. So I think the psychology side and the physiological side are absolutely huge. And you can't ignore tactical and technical. Of course you can't. So it's that whole 360-degree approach. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting bringing up those different cultures as well from those sports that you mentioned, because obviously if you're talking rugby, football and cricket, there's a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of differences going on in those sports, obviously from the demands of the actual sport. But it's interesting what you spoke about from a cricket perspective, the skill-based sport, where you're having to maybe fight battles to or prove to players that the impact that you can have on the field. I know I've spoke about a similar sort of thing a number of different times in football. Can you think of any specific examples? Obviously, you don't have to share names or anything like that, of wins that you've had with players in that situation, or maybe the mindset that you've had to tap into to get players to go from either seeing gym as punishment or seeing gym as something that's going to take away from time that they work on their skill, or whatever it is that's restricting them from stepping in and getting the work done, to then you putting something in place and getting them in there.
Yeah, I mean, Ben, honestly, I literally could have a giggle with you about a ton of different players who struggled at first to go to the gym, and then inevitably I was only at Northants for 1 year, so the team, so I've just named it. But I was only there 1 year. We actually did have a relatively successful season. Proudly, we won T20 in Birmingham, which is a cracking sort of culmination of a lot of different things and some cracking players as well. But to answer the question, one of the opening batsmen he had a phenomenal season, absolutely phenomenal season. I guess, to put it as simply as possible, I really kind of adopted a reductionist approach to strength and conditioning, i.e., the least we can do to get an outcome that we're after basically as a coach and a player. So in context, just say I always used to love getting this, whether it's right or wrong, it's just my way of maybe doing stuff. So I used to get the speed gates out on the outfield all the time. And it was the carrot. Well, I'm not saying the carrot and the stick, but potentially it's that kind of analogy, which would be, okay, guys, during practice, we'd warm up. I mean, there's going to be bowlers bowling, there's going to be batters batting. We're going to do a little bit of physical preparation. We'll do our warm up. And then what I wanted to do is 3 to 5 efforts through the speed gates over 20 meters. Not a massive amount of volume. We're talking about 3 times 20, 60 meters of flat out effort, 5 times maybe if you've got a little bit more diligence or you want to just do a little bit extra. Anyway, the other kind of carrot to that would be, if you give me 90% of your best effort, which we've obviously done some benchmarking in the off season and what have you, if you give me 90% effort, or within 90%, of your best effort, your PB, you're done. So you'd have some guys giving me 1 rep.
Yeah.
Because if they're in the ballpark, I know we want to add a level of resiliency to our programming, and we want to add a little bit of volume to give them some sort of level of protection as well. But ultimately, the win was, are you going to give me effort?
Mm.
And one effort within 10% of your personal best is fast enough, in my view, to retain that physical quality. So we've done something. We've retained your speed qualities this week. You've given me 1 effort. Yes, we can argue for volumes and extra reps and all that sort of stuff. But in this particular context, getting one effort at maximum intensity is better than nothing. So that's the first thing. So that was a win. The other one, which we can't help but talk about when I'm on a podcast, is the introduction of velocity-based training. And that was also another little bit of I guess, coercion to help players and provide players with instantaneous feedback that, from my point of view as a practitioner, allowed me to know whether they're making any effort or not. And once you start creating a level of competition and almost gamifying some of the training process, you actually have that player engagement again. So just things, one of my biases, for those who know me, is the hex bar jump. So very low load, some relatively high velocity movements. Let's put at that point in time, it was a Tendo unit, tethered linear position transducer. Now I use other technologies. I will mention output, I'm sure. But yeah, but anyway, those 2 things in tandem pretty much laid the foundations for more engagement with the player group. So in summary to that, it's objectivity and a level of competition stoked the kind of furnace when it came to driving that training intent and training effort. And those are 2 of the introductions, or 2 of the only things I did that had a tipping point from a few people being involved in or engaging fully in the strength and conditioning process to much more / the majority of the group getting involved with the training process and giving a little bit more. So, and then there's obviously those micro conversations as well. I mean, I'm sitting on the balcony one day with 2 relatively senior players talking about supporting them with their goals and them fulfilling their kind of career objectives. And like we said, most professional cricket players, football players, rugby players, they're competitive humans. You don't get to be a professional sports person unless you've got a level of alpha and a level of resiliency, and you've gone through a bit of adversity. So we're talking about contracts, we're talking about how the game's progressing, and now you're talking about franchise cricket, which is, for those who don't follow much cricket, is short formats of the game with relatively high paydays all over the world. I mean, one of the boys that I'm talking to on this balcony here has just literally returned from the South African T20 competition this winter. He spent the last 2 months in Cape Town and Port Elizabeth in the sunshine, made a half decent kind of tour fee. And that was the other catalyst here, which was get on the wavelength of the player with what they want to achieve out of the game. And some of them, it might be, wealth. Some of them, it might be dominate and leave the game, with a great career record. Most of them are kind of interested in making a tidy living. Of course they are. So this was the other catalyst for this conversation, which was, do you want to play kind of pro cricket in England for a few years, or do you want to have a long career where you can obviously increase your earning potential, 10x by being better? And by being better, I mean tactically, technically, psychologically, and importantly, from my point of view, physically. And we had a conversation, and now both of those two players are still playing professional cricket. I've been out of cricket for 6 years, and they're also making a relatively tidy living playing this franchise type cricket. And I don't know, it's not just physical, of course it's not, but they've got to appreciate that physical training is really, really important and complementary to their skills training and their development as a player. And that for me is a win. But that was the coach connection piece that went alongside a little bit of integration of technology. And I'm guessing, you've seen my bio, it's 28 years long. I have I've got a level of skill to be able to connect and communicate with players to, drive a level of buy-in that improves them as a player. Because I'm not doing it for myself, I'm doing it for them. We are support staff. We are supporting other people's goals. And as soon as they kind of recognize, I know this is a bit cliche about this whole soft skills thing, but if players recognize that you do deeply care about them and their development, there's a level of trust that's entwined then in the process of training. And that will hopefully lead to positive outcomes. And that's transferable to all sports.
I love those examples because a lot of people listening maybe not had the exact experiences that you've mentioned there, but there'll be something that resonates where they feel like they've put something in place. You could do more, but at that time it's plenty and you're getting that buy-in and it's a win, isn't it? So I think I love those. I wanted to dive into the velocity-based training part because obviously it's something that you've spoke about a lot. I don't know how we've not had a conversation yet about this, but just on that side, just to start with, in terms of that buy-in for the players, because you obviously mentioned the two areas then, getting that speed exposure and then getting essentially in the gym, working with things like a trap bar jump. What was the attraction, you think, from the player's perspective, introducing velocity-based training and not just in terms of doing that jump or an exercise without the velocity-based training?
Yeah, I mean, going back to that specific example, I mean, I can use plenty of other examples I'll probably use some rugby references because I guess they're more relevant from a performance-orientated standpoint, and we'll go back to that in a minute. But in the cricket example, and actually with the hex bar, with the mountain biker, there's two things there which I hopefully will touch on now. The cricket, it was about engaging them in the process of getting to the gym and doing something constructive, and I guess amplifying their performance through competition. So, boys going up against each other with a fixed load, just say it was a 40 kilo or 30 kilo hex bar jump. It's like, right, so-and-so's jumping at 1 meter per second. Can you jump faster? As long as they're technically kind of competent. We didn't want to just see fast reps that were just ugly. We wanted to see, technically well put together lifting, but also, just drive competition. That was the premise there. But then once you've got them there, engaged, you can then do some other high quality work while you got them. It was getting them there first and getting them into that mentality of this is going to be important for our kind of carryover and our transfer to on-field success, which was the hardest thing in the first place. But once we got them there, we can then start molding a program that has more than just a hex bar jump in it. Do you know what I mean? But the other good example of integrating velocity-based training with the downhill mountain biker, there were two things that were really cool about that particular project. And like I said earlier, he wanted to ride down the hill as fast as he possibly could. And when he stayed on, he ended up doing pretty well, but he fell off quite a lot because he just pushed the limit. But one thing that this particular rider always wanted to do when he left the gym was feel like he felt at the end of a race, which was absolutely exhausted. And the one thing that velocity-based training allowed us to do, and well, there were two things. The first thing was, again, about developing trust with this particular rider, which was the goal of our training together is for you to help make the bike go faster. So doing circuit training, which is what he had historically done in his life, is not going to help you make the bike go faster. And I'll tell you why. And this was the conversation we had as coach and athlete. And anyway, long story short, he stopped killing himself in the gym, and we developed his strength levels to the point where, actually, I know this may or may not resonate with people, and it may or may not sound impressive, it doesn't matter. He did a triple bodyweight hex bar deadlift. He was a 70-kilo man, and he ended up doing a 210-kilo hex bar deadlift. So he was incredibly strong. And we use velocity-based training to help us make some objective decisions when it came to his actual training program. But the reason why I say that, not just to say, oh, he's a triple bodyweight hex bar deadlifter, but when we came to measure his peak power output on a watt bike 6-second test, he went from 900 watts to 1700 watts in a 6-month period. So in line with that, we saw with the strength stimulus, his hex bar went from about I think it was a 108 to start with to a 210. So he put 100 kilos on his hex bar. So he got stronger. He put more power through the pedals every time. And we obviously charted that over a 6-month period. And that got me the buy-in with him that we don't just have to do circuits all the time, because he saw his numbers on this watt bike peak power test keep going up and up and up. As he got stronger, he could produce more force. He could, the downstroke on his pedals. He wanted more power. He is a gravity sports athlete. He wanted to push that bike as fast as he could down the hill. But the integration of velocity-based training helped us dial back on some of the intensity that he was used to in terms of just flogging himself. We could literally deliver really good quality of strength stimulus. So that was a good example of using the VBT. And going back to my rugby days, a lot of it was about their physical prowess in rugby is essential. In order to dominate collision, you do have to be strong. You do have to be powerful. There's not many rugby players who miss out on the gym. Don't get me wrong, Ben, there's tons of people who, a bit like cricket and football, we have to coerce. They want to play their sport. They're exceptionally good at their sport. The gym is not the be all and end all. And I totally respect that. And we have to understand the mentality of players. But for the most part, physical domination in rugby is kind of part and parcel. Weight sessions are normal operating procedure when it comes to a training schedule and a weekly exposure to different training stimulus. But the velocity-based training piece for rugby was actually interesting because, yes, I want to develop maximum strength in players, but also I think integrating VBT allows you to give the appropriate dose on the appropriate day, given some of the numbers, and managing the demands and manipulating the loads to get what you want out of a particular training session. So if you are experienced with velocity-based training, you can give a player a specific dose of strength work that's not going to be, taking away from preparing them for the weekend by overly fatiguing them. You still have to lift some heavy weights at times throughout the season, and we understand that. But ultimately, you cannot necessarily always be hammering high intensity, and getting those players into that kind of downward dip of fatigue and residual fatigue. So that's the thing that really captured my attention when it came to understanding more deeply the VBT and its applications, because you can dose appropriately without creating, like I say, that level of fatigue that's going to impact on week to week performances at the weekend. And as you can imagine with rugby, I know you come from a different background, but the collision element of rugby is exhausting and massively fatiguing. So the thing in the gym, yes, we still can't get away from developing strength because it's an important quality for your game transfer, but we're not going to kill you in the gym as well as kill you on the field. And that synergy of integrating tech and delivering the right stimulus at the right time in the right amount is super valuable. And that's why I'm so passionate about VBT, because I think whether you're a footballer who wants to be fresh and prepared for, week in, week out exposure to high level competition, strength training is absolutely, for me, part and parcel of your everyday, or not every day, but your weekly exposure to load has to involve some level of maximum strength and other strength qualities as well. And you can just, manage it really, really effectively with that integration of technology.
I want to get into some of the, because obviously you mentioned like different phases of training and how that would be slightly manipulated depending on what metrics you're using, what metrics you're looking at through those periods. But it's really interesting you're talking about those battles you're facing, because especially with the mountain bike or the downhill guy, because in football, I think a lot of the time, I'm talking now probably a few years ago, I do think this has changed a little bit now, but a few years ago, the battle would be that players' natural approach to the gym, especially lower body work, would be such high volume, it would cause a lot of soreness, which would mean they either do it or they don't do it. It was that there was no area in between in terms of like changing the approach. It was either I do it and get sore, or I don't train legs because I get sore. And I think this is the extra information that players have needed, because now it's a case of no, it's not do or don't. There's a middle ground that we need to educate on. And I do think a lot of players and a lot of teams now are using that middle ground. But it's just really interesting you talking about that. Obviously, you talked about circuit training. It just resonated with me that it's similar sort of battle that people have faced.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I've had a conversation with a couple of guys in Europe about this, around training for strength qualities and the soreness piece for football particularly. And that's the challenge that the community is facing. And that's rugby, that's cricket, that's football, that's netball, that's field hockey, whatever sport people are dealing with when it comes to supporting those athletes. But you're right. I always say time should never be a constraint, especially, well, if you're a professional sports person, time should never be a constraint. There's always time to do some strength work. But also, I think, Ben, the point that I'd like to make is that it doesn't have to be an hour-long strength training session. You know, your leg example is absolutely perfect. One, I use velocity-based training for 4 exercises, essentially. If you can squat with competency, squat. Hex bar is my kind of bias and go-to for most athletes because it's so athlete-friendly. Bench press, bench pull. That's pretty much it. There's a couple of others, but 4 main exercises. So just use an example of, say, an academy-aged footballer, 18 to 20. It's really important that you get strong for performance and for robustness. So there's two strands to sell to the player. Do you want to be robust in order to make that next step to the elite level and stay there? That's the first one. And the second one, so that's performance. And the second one is, robustness. You're going to stay there once you get there. You only need, I mean, if you're going to work the full spectrum of strength qualities, you can jump, you can do something moderately heavy, you can do something heavy. You can probably do 5 total sets, Ben. Jump once, 1 set of 3 with a low load and high velocity. Just call it 30 kilos. I mean, rugby context, you got guys who can do it with 250 kilos. So it's 30 kilos is like nothing, 10% of 1 rep max. But just say anywhere between 15 and 30% of 1 rep max. Jump once, 1 set of 3 with maximal intent. Put the little, whichever device you use, if you're using velocity-based training in this context, one set max effort. Give them a device to look at. You've got some instantaneous feedback. Are you moving this bar at 1.5 meters per second? Yes or no? Okay, no, it's too heavy. I know that sounds, it's only 30 kilos, but you're either not giving me enough intent, or you've not got the underlying strength qualities to move something light quick. So we'll work on something else. But in the real world, and in this particular example, 1 set of 3. That's all I want you to do. 1. Then put 70 kilos on the bar. Give me 1 set of 3, moving the bar at between 0.7 and 0.9 meters per second. So you've got that kind of middle ground of strength speed, but it's moderate, but it's not really heavy. Okay, give me 1 set of 3. So you've done 2 sets so far. And then give me 3 sets of 3 to 5 with 100 kilos or 105 or 110, depending on the context of how strong. You'll understand in real terms, wherever you're placed, how strong that athlete is. So you're not asking them to lift anything more than they're capable of. But you give me 3 sets of 3 to 5 with the starting load at about 0.6 meters per second, maybe working down towards 0.5 and at best 0.4 meters per second. So heavy, but not really heavy. You give me 5 sets on the trap bar. That's going to take, if you're warm, that's going to take 20 minutes. Yes, you can then do some hamstring kind of accessory work, and you maybe don't want to do some glute or some trunk core work, whatever. Mate, you can do that in half an hour and you won't be sore. And then you can layer that again and again and again and be consistent and be consistent, be consistent. And before you know it, the academy age player who's got a 100 kilo trap bar will have a 150 kilo trap bar. They'll be stronger. They'll be able to move people around more. They'll be able to manage contact, because let's face it, football's got not as much contact as rugby, obviously, but it's got a level of contact. It's got a level of, that resiliency and robustness that you need to change direction, accelerate, start, stop, whatever. And those things, get a player to give you 3 sets, 2 sets at the heavy end. 2 sets is better than no sets, especially if you see them twice a week. And that's how it starts. And then you get them on the hook.
Yeah.
Them physically being able to dominate and have their physical prowess kind of extend to the transfer onto the field, then you'll have a player buy-in. But you've got to be able to win. You've got to be able to win that first conversation, haven't you? That's the goal, because there are some who, like you say, they're all or nothing. It's like, hold on a minute. You don't have to train. Soreness is not a good indication of training effectiveness. Mel Sift's got a great quote. I can't quote it word for word, but I'll find it for the show notes.
Yeah.
And I'll share it with you. It's a great quote. It's only about 3 or 4 sentences, but in summary, it's literally saying any fool could make you tired. It's having enough stress to adapt to that training stress without being too much. And that's, again, not wanting to harp on, but that's why I love velocity-based training, because you can give an appropriate stimulus without driving a player into the ground. That's where the gold is.
It also ties in with what you mentioned before. The main goal that players will come to you with isn't to like increase muscle size or do any sort of hypertrophy work. A lot of the time, anyway, obviously there's going to be time and a place for that. A lot of the time it's going to be, I want to get faster. I want a better acceleration. I want to be stronger on the ball. These are all things that should be lighting up like cues in your head.
Correct. Well, that's the other thing that you've got to do. And that's the other thing that I think is really important from our point of view as practitioners. Everything that we do in the gym is not to satisfy my goals as a coach. Because if you're stronger, Ben, that's great. But if you're stronger but not a better player,
yeah,
we're not actually doing our job, because the job of a support coach and a performance staff member is to make sure the player is better. We can't lose sight of that. That's vitally important. So you're absolutely right. Why are we doing this exercise? A better player. Secondary benefit, you get stronger in this exercise here. You've just given me 3 examples of how getting basically, base level of strength in the gym up to a level is making you better in performance context. That has to be the focus, and the focus of our conversations and the focus of our work. Because like I say, there's no point. I've got some other cracking examples, mate, of guys who are super strong and powerful, but they actually, this is in a rugby context, they weren't good at the sport. They were professional level, but they only stayed professional level for a year or so because they always went back to or resorted back to their strengths, which were the gym and not on the skills. I've told players before, and I've said this in a few other podcasts, I've told players to get out of the gym. The gym is not your limiting factor. You are one of the strongest people I've ever tested, and I've tested a lot of people. You are one of the fastest and most explosive humans I've ever worked with. But your primary role on the field is letting you down because one of them was a hooker. You can't throw in. You give away so many, free kicks or not straight penalty or not straight scrum kind of resets because you throw the ball to them. It's like your job is to throw the ball straight down the middle like an arrow, and you can't do it. That's not just that's psychological, that's tactical, technical. It's you've got a crowd behind you and you just get the yips or whatever. There's a lot of factors that went into it, but the point you're getting is physiologically that's not your weakest link. Work on your skills and just give me a tiny little bit of a dose. He's the perfect example for a 20-minute weight session. So he satisfies his need to do weights. Great, I've got no problem with that. But actually, go and spend another 45 minutes on your skills.
Yeah.
And this is the same context that will help footballers get better. Just give me 20 to 30 minutes of good quality strength training twice a week. Over a 12-month period, that's 100 exposures to strength training. Over a 3-year period, that's 300 exposures. Just think of a 16 or 17 or 18-year-old, even a senior professional. 300 exposures to strength. I know it's difficult. We've got such high-pressured environments. The Premier League, obviously, other leagues are in the world as well, but they play, twice a week at times. The winning at the weekend is so important for a lot of people, but so is winning in 5 years' time. So is winning in 10 years' time. As a player, you don't want to just be a one-year wonder. You want to stay in the league. And all physical qualities contribute to your performance. But you get the context. Just give me an hour a week for the rest of your career, and it will hold you in good stead. I can certainly, have confidence in predicting that.
Anyone listening that's struggling with players on that battle. You need to just clip those last few minutes and just send it to them. And I'm sure
Yeah,
it'll help.
it's got to be. Well, that's it. Well, hopefully, hopefully the young practitioners who may have this battle have got the ability to communicate with their players in the 21st century way and share a podcast with those players of theirs and go, listen to this bit here. And like you say, clip 40 minutes to 42 minutes, listen to that, a little soundbite. Because some players, it will resonate. And I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk tech. Players are going to own their own data, aren't they? Players are going to be more invested in how they stay fit, how they can, maintain their performance advantage, because we can't get away from the fact that the riches involved in football are huge, and one extra year as a player is in the high leagues anyway. It's a seven-figure income.
Yeah,
It's like
massive.
just invest an hour a day or an hour a week, in your strength training, and just guess what? You might get an extra year. You might get an extra 2 years. And I mean, of course, we're going to bias towards physical training. It's part of our kind of professional DNA. But yeah, some people we've got to fight with, and we've just got to get creative.
Yeah,
And
100%.
communicate effectively. Not always
Definitely.
easy.
Chris, I want to get on to our quick fire questions in a second, but
Okay,
just before we do that, I wanted to just touch on training for different physical qualities using velocity-based training. Because obviously we're at a time of season as we record this where we get into like crunch time for football, where it's the last few fixtures, and then we're going to be into an off season, then we're going into a pre-season, then the whole season starts again. So there's going to be times of the year where we have slightly different focuses. So if someone's using velocity-based training with their players or individual players, what are your sort of go-to metrics? Where are we focusing for different parts of the season, for different physical qualities? And I realize this could be a podcast in itself, by the way, as well.
No, sure. No, I guess the short answer and the summary would be, I'm not a massive fan, and it has its application in hypertrophy, but I think in a sporting context, quality of strength and power is really, really important, even in the off season. So if let's go to football. Strength and power qualities in the off season, no running demands. You can spend a little bit more time and a little bit more volume. And Ben, as you suggest, we could probably do a whole podcast on this, because I'm just my mind.
Maybe we should as well. Maybe we should, because it would be a good area to tap into.
Okay. Well, right now, I would not be overly concerned about volume. It's more about the quality and getting people, based off the back of our conversation we've just spent time having, just good quality strength training Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and just literally 3 main exercises: a lower body dominant bilateral, maybe a single leg variation, which you can integrate velocity based training into as well, a push and a pull, literally on rotation. I know it sounds really boring. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, hex bar deadlift, step up, push pull, plus some accessory stuff. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Honestly, I know it might bore people to death, but literally the exposure, the consistency, you can manage and manipulate volumes and intensities. Of course you can, like every other periodization methodology. But that for me would be the start point for football. Doesn't get in a very long off season, does it? There's that psychological kind of decompression that I think is essential. I mean, do you do it for 2 weeks before you go into pre-season? And then you've got to marry this up with the running demands, you see. I'm a very, I know it's a bit of a cliche term, but minimum effective dose. I'm massive on, three good sets every other day is better than smashing yourself for 10 sets in one session and being sore like you've suggested. So that would be, I think it's more about a habit and more about a habit tracker, and just getting in the habit of, right, I am going to just do 6 to 9 sets a week on my lower body, and I'm going to spread them out evenly across the week. And there's going to be warm-up sets, and you can jump like we've suggested already. You can jump with the hex bar. You can do a moderate load, using the velocity-based training device as a guide to how ready you are to do the heavy stuff. So if you literally, let's go back to our first example we used 10, 15 minutes ago. Jump once, lift something moderately heavy once, do three what I call sets to develop maximum strength qualities. Five sets, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and just watch how that sort of, I guess, pans out over the first 3 weeks. And then from there, you're literally going to be able to manage then into the in-season. When you see the running demands of pre-season go up and up and up, you're going to then be able to just manipulate the amount of work you do. So it might be that some days you literally, I know seems like a really simple way of doing things, but in terms of getting player buy-in, you might have an on-field, I mean, football historically, I'm not sure, does kind of double days and, multiple training days, multiple training sessions in a day. But in rugby, that's commonplace. You'll do a field-based session, you do a weight session, that's everyday behaviors. But you can then look at literally just a maintenance dose in the preseason of 2 sets of 3, heavy, twice a week. So you've gone from 3 sets, which isn't exactly enormous demands, to 2. So you're just reducing the volume slightly, but you're also, in the grand scheme of things, just ticking over with that physical quality time and time again. And that is where you'll get buy-in for a player as well, because you won't get the soreness from that. And yes, of course, you've got to add that hamstring resiliency and that calf complex and all those other things as well. But in terms of your main loading, it doesn't take that long, especially you can even, and I'm toying with this concept mentally in my head, and I have spoken to some football practitioners about this as well, about how you can fit every single training unit sequentially and without kind of competition of damaging the, what's the right word I'm looking for? The interference effect. How we can do a 2-hour training session that gets everything. So it's almost like you do your speed session at the front end of where you're neurally most fresh. You then do your tactical, technical, your running based demands, and then you do the strength component at the end of the 2-hour window. But what that does, I mean, this is how my mind works. I'm trying to provide the best possible performance solutions and also give players the time to recover, the time to be away from training, the time to spend time with their families, etc. Can you do everything in a 2-hour window and then give them all the tools to recover, good nutrition, all the other recovery modalities that are available, the massages, the, whatever else might be pertinent to that particular environment. But yeah, I mean, these are the things that I'm trying. You can be so efficient with your velocity-based training prescription if you understand the mechanics and the mechanism of it. It's a fun little puzzle to try to sort of put together, really. And I think that's what all of us as practitioners should be doing, trying to get the best possible solutions for our player groups.
Yeah, love that. I love the sort of outside of the box thinking as well, because I think that's really important with what we do and how we apply this stuff as well. It makes complete sense as well, trying to tie things in together to give players that time away, which, again, we've spoke about it before on the podcast about the sort of badge of honor and being in a training ground for so long. It's not needed. Players need to get in, get the work done and get out.
Correct. And Ben, on that, I think one of the biggest things that I've seen over the last 20 or so years is bringing players, and this is cricket, this is rugby, this is football, bringing players to the training ground for a recovery session, bringing players to the training ground for what in rugby terms was the captain's run, that 15 minutes worth of kind of final rehearsals. It's like, actually, in the long term, mentally, physically, tactically, and technically, give the players time away from training backgrounds to decompress, because the pressures of elite sport are high. And I think as a performance coach, I recognize that. As someone who's coached a lot of high level players, I recognize that, and so do they. The time away, just because they're highly paid, doesn't mean that you have to sort of own them 360 days a year. And I think that's a massive step forward for us as I guess, as a profession and as people who work in sport and with people. You cannot literally own a player for 350 days a year.
Yeah.
Time away is actually really, really valuable for both. And obviously, you and I mentioned Josh at the beginning of this. Josh Fletcher would be a massive advocate of more time off, not to idly waste it, because it's actually decompression and psychologically you regeneration and all that stuff. But because if you get your training right, why have players that training every single day? Other than for control.
Yeah.
That's the reality. That is the reality. But anyway.
Yeah. No,
there's my mini rant.
No, it's so true. I've literally had a conversation with a friend this morning whose team are up there challenging for promotion, and they're in training most days, and they're crying out for that time away just from the club. Just in terms of
this time of year. At this time of
yeah,
year, yeah, massive.
yeah,
I know football particularly, and like I say, I've worked in this sports tech sector now for probably close to 2 years, and I've got to know a little bit more about the football culture and some of the football S&C coaches, and met some new professional relations and what have you. There's so much pressure to be, like you said, wear the badge of honor, be at work every day, but you're so tired that you can't think laterally, you can't think clearly around, solving problems for your particular team, and just having that decompression away from sport to catch your own breath and be a high performer. It's a big challenge. It really is a big challenge.
Yeah, definitely. Chris, I could discuss this stuff all day. So I think we do need to get another episode in, because I feel like we've skimmed the surface of some topics I think we could probably go quite deep into. I wanted to finish with the quick fire questions that we finished the podcast with. The first of which is, who've been some of the biggest influences on your career so far?
Oh God, there's 28 years worth of names. Do you want me to reel them off? I really love. Okay, so I'll give you. I mean, I'll quick fire. Paddy Upton. He's a performance coach who's based himself primarily in elite level cricket. He helped me shape my philosophy when it comes to a terminology called collective intelligence, which is using everybody's intellectual property to improve a team. That's players, coaches, physios, everybody, psychologists, nutritionists. Everybody has value to add to an environment. So Paddy Upton will be one. Jeremy Shepherd, who works in elite level action sports now. He's with the Canadian snowboarding team. I think his general kind of demeanor as a coach is phenomenal. He really does blend. He's a PhD, so he blends academic horsepower with what he calls dude. He's on the mate. He's a snowboarder. He goes camping out in the wild of blooming Whistler in Canada with his boy. I mean, he's got a bit of rebellion about him. I love him. There's a guy who goes very much under the radar called Ben Williams, who's with Ineos, head of performance services for the Ineos group of sports, and they've got a ton of sports. Ben always leaves me seriously kind of, I guess, suffering imposter syndrome, because I think I know nothing. He goes into he's a big aerobic physiology guy, and I'm a big strength and power guy. So we kind of clash in the middle of differences in philosophy, but we always have a good, robust discussion. A guy called Mark Bennett. This is my fourth and probably final. Actually, I've got one more. Mark Bennett was a phenomenal mentor for me when I was young. Really, really did help me understand sort of the history and some of the underpinning science around strength and power training, particularly. He was at the Welsh Rugby Union when I was, and Craig White, who subsequently exited strength and conditioning, was also at Welsh Rugby Union when I was in Cardiff. He was a phenomenal coach who really helped me appreciate not just the strength and conditioning side of performance, but a bit more of that 360-degree approach to player development. That was that kind of catalyst for my kind of change in philosophy from, oh yeah, they're fast and strong, so I've done my job, into actually, are they a better player? And that was about 2007, so 15, 16 years ago. So those five particularly, I'd say. But I mean, Ben, there's a host of names that have had a massive influence on my career, both as players and performance coaches, particularly.
And what would you say your biggest strength is as a practitioner?
I was going to say strength, but my super strength is my kind of, I guess, my knowledge in and around that, I guess. But I personally, and hopefully the player group or the player groups that I've worked with would say it's that coach connection piece. I'd say it's that soft skill of being able to really communicate and effectively, I guess, have influence over players. I mean, I'd like to think that if you asked a few players that I've worked with in the past, what they would say that it was my strength to be able to connect.
Brilliant. And what would be your top bit of career advice if you went back 20 odd years, Chris?
Yeah.
Gave yourself some career advice, what would it be?
Yeah. I would think it would be, going back that long, don't be so blinkered to look within strength and conditioning for solutions. I think one of the biggest and best things I ever did, and it is still in sport, over the last, probably, I remember it actually, Felix Baumgartner jumped out of space, didn't he? And I think it was just over 10 years ago. But before that, I got into Red Bull and action sports. And it's a bit going back to your question, Ben, around what could football learn from rugby and what could rugby learn from other sports. Learn from other sports is particularly one of the things that I would have said to my younger self. If I could go back, I'd go and look at much more broadly performance. That would be performing arts, creative arts, engineering, the music industry potentially, alongside like high performers. I'm just reading a book now from Dave Grohl called The Storyteller. And Dave Grohl, for those who don't know, those young people who've never heard of the Foo Fighters, Dave Grohl was absolutely passionate about being in a band and being in a successful band, and chased that goal and chased that dream. And he displayed high performing habits, in my opinion. But you've got to look outside of your circle and your bubble. And that's the biggest bit of career advice I could give a young practitioner would be, get out of your bubble and go and look at diverse solutions for potential problem solving for your future self.
And final one, mate, before you've got the school run to tackle.
Nice. Well done. Yeah.
What is your approach now to CPD? Continued learning, staying on the ball. What is your
brilliant
approach to that?
That is a great question, and I'll tell you something, that pursuit of mastery is never ending. So I love a guy called Dan Paff, who's got to be in his 70s now, Altis, one of the best coaches I've ever had the privilege of speaking with face to face. I guess, my approach to professional development is it's never going to end. I mean, like I say, I'm just turned 50 something. And I sometimes feel like I know nothing about the industry. It's so broad and so wide. And I know we talked off air, just to answer it, on how much information is now available online. It's quite staggering and overwhelming, if I'm being brutally honest. So having a great filter is part of being a good practitioner, but also having a filter of understanding your professional development and where it needs to go for your career development, career longevity is something that's also important. So I guess, in summary, it's be thoughtful around what you're going to need to develop yourself as a practitioner and as a person. And it might not be just, like I say, the book smarts of strength and conditioning. But I will say, because we did talk about this off air, I wish some of the young practitioners would have a better and a deeper appreciation of the people who've gone before them. I think if you asked some who are well read will be able to name, the Schmidt-Bleichers of this world and the Verkhoshanskys of this world from a strength power perspective, particularly. But I think some of the young practitioners now, they may read the journal articles of today, but I don't think they've got an appreciation of the people who've come before them in the industry. And I think that's something from our point of view as slightly older practitioners. We do understand and respect who's come before us. And I think legacy-wise, can we leave strength and conditioning or performance in a better position? Yes, we can. Of course we can. But how we do that is, by honoring those who came before us as well. I think that's something that I'd love the sort of Instagram and TikTok generation to have maybe a bit more of a deeper appreciation of some of those kind of rock star scientists who were around before the internet was invented. You know what I mean? But maybe that's just me being a old fossil and a bit of a romantic when it comes to that sort of stuff.
No, I think it's a great point, mate. Chris, that's been superb. Some great information. I know we've sort of rushed through things a little bit there, well, it feels like so anyway, but there's some absolutely incredible information there. And I mean, let's try and get another one in, because I think there's so much more we could go into, and I really appreciate your time.
No problem, Ben. It's been brilliant. I've enjoyed it.